Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that's going to completely flip your understanding of history and influence. I want to introduce you to Amanda Berry Smith. This is a woman whose life just completely defied every single expectation of the 19th century. Like, if you think you know what a global leader looked like in the 1800s, well, prepare to have those assumptions totally challenged. We're talking about someone who started out with absolutely nothing that society valued at the time, and yet she built a legacy that literally crossed oceans.
Just think about the impossible paradox of her life for a second. On one hand, you've got a woman who literally washed other people's clothes just to survive. On the other, an international evangelist preaching to thousands. I mean, how do you even bridge that gap? How does someone whose day job the world deemed completely insignificant become this globally recognized voice? Well, that's exactly the incredible journey we're going to unpack for you today.
Section 1. Born into Slavery, Overcoming the Impossible.
So to really grasp the heights Amanda Smith eventually reached, we've got to look at the incredibly harsh starting line of her life. Born into slavery in Maryland back in 1837, she started out with these immense systemic barriers just totally stacked against her. Now, her father did eventually secure his freedom and worked relentlessly to buy the rest of the family's freedom, moving them up north to Pennsylvania. But as you know, freedom didn't automatically mean equality. Picture the towering obstacles here. As a poor, uneducated black woman, she didn't have any wealth or financial platform to stand on. No formal theological education, no seminary degree, no prestigious titles, and absolutely zero wealthy institutional backing. Society had basically drawn a very, very tight box around what someone with her background was allowed to achieve.
And it wasn't just systemic barriers, right? Her challenges were deeply, deeply personal. She married young, but tragedy just seemed to relentlessly follow her. Her first husband was abusive and eventually deserted her. Her second husband passed away, and most devastatingly, she suffered the absolute heartbreak of losing her children to illness. By the time she reached middle age, she was carrying a genuinely staggering amount of grief. But here's the turning point. Instead of letting that grief break her, those profound losses became the catalyst for this massive spiritual transformation. Her faith stopped being just something she inherited. It became the absolute core of her life, drawing her really deeply into what was known as the Holiness movement.
Which brings us to Section 2, the Washerwoman's Calling and the Power of Testimony.
So after her second husband died, Amanda had to figure out how to survive. She went back to domestic work, cleaning houses, scrubbing clothes. Just back-breaking physical labor. But while her hands were busy working, she answered a completely different kind of calling, the call to preach. Now, in the 19th century, women preaching publicly faced massive opposition, and for a black woman, the obstacles were just towering. But here's the absolute secret to her impact. She wasn't speaking about suffering from some comfortable distance. She had lived it. She basically weaponized her greatest asset, which was her own painful personal story. She could talk about poverty without an ounce of shame. She could speak on grief, widowhood, and vicious racial discrimination without letting any of it define her. And because she was just so incredibly genuine, her testimony gave her preaching this undeniable credibility. It drew these huge mixed-race audiences, even in a deeply, deeply segregated America.
Moving on to Section 3, Preaching Across Continents and Breaking Boundaries.
All right, so here's where her story just explodes way beyond the borders of the United States. In 1878, Amanda makes this completely life-changing decision to cross the Atlantic and head to England. For a black woman traveling independently, largely relying on her own tiny ministry resources, this was a staggering geographic leap. I want you to really put yourself in her shoes for a second. Imagine the sheer logistical absurdity of international travel in the 19th century. There are no airplanes. There's no internet to quickly book a ticket, no modern fundraising platforms like GoFundMe to help you out. Travel was slow, it was insanely expensive, and it was physically brutal. Every single leg of her journey required meticulous planning, hard-earned cash, and just an immense amount of personal courage.
She lacked literally all of our modern institutional conveniences. But what she did have was a Bible, her personal testimony, and just this unbreakable determination. Her absolute sheer conviction that the gospel was for everyone, regardless of borders. That was the engine propelling her forward, even when literally everything else in society was telling her to just stay home.
Let's track these awe-inspiring geographic leaps together. Born in Maryland in 1837, by 1878, she's all the way in England. Jump to the 1880s, and she's spending significant time preaching in Liberia and Sierra Leone. By the 1890s, she is proclaiming Christianity all the way over in India. And then she spends her final years before passing in 1915 down in Sebring, Florida. I mean, wow. This wasn't just some local speaking tour. This was a genuinely global footprint.
And you know, her time in Africa is especially profound. Just think about the poetic juxtaposition of this journey. She started out as the daughter of formerly enslaved parents in America. Decades later, here she is, standing before European-descended and African audiences, preaching to massive crowds. She essentially took her family's incredibly painful history of enslavement and transformed it into a powerful, liberating international message, right there on the very continent her ancestors were taken from. It's just incredible.
As she traveled to places like India, she championed the Holiness movement. Now, just as a quick reminder, this was a 19th century Christian movement really focused on sanctification and a deeper personal experience of God's grace. And her presence in India is key. She wasn't there as a colonial administrator or some highly credentialed academic scholar. She was there as a black female evangelist. And that proved that this movement was developing a really rapidly growing international and cross-cultural character. Her message literally crossed oceans.
Section 4. The Educator and Author, Preserving Her Voice.
So, Amanda didn't just leave an impact from the pulpit, she made sure to leave tangible, lasting records behind. After decades of this relentless travel, she shifted her focus to making sure her work would actually outlive her. In 1893, she published her autobiography, and guys, the historical importance of this book absolutely cannot be overstated. By writing this down, she ensured that her unique experiences, everything from slavery to domestic labor, from devastating loss to global travel, were preserved entirely in her own voice. She didn't just leave her legacy to be filtered or rewritten by white male historians or missionaries, she owned her narrative.
She also took direct action to empower the next generation. She really understood this vital balance. Preaching might change a spiritual life, but education changes a person's future. So, driven by this really deep desire to give young black women the exact kinds of opportunities that she was denied growing up, she went ahead and established the Amanda Smith Industrial School for Girls in Harvey, Illinois. It provided them with absolutely crucial education and real practical training.
Section 5. An Impossible Legacy, Shattering the Mold.
When you zoom out and look at the big picture, the sheer scale of the historical shifts she survived is breathtaking. Think about it. Born before the American Civil War, lived through emancipation, witnessed the entirety of Reconstruction, and then the grim rise of segregation. And through all of those incredibly volatile eras, she built an independent, global ministry. Her ultimate takeaway is profound. She totally redefined our understanding of history. She hammered home the fact that 19th century missions weren't just carried out by famous men with wealthy institutional backing. No, women traveled, black Christians traveled, poor Christians and everyday lay people traveled. She overcame this incredible tricolon of obstacles, being black, being a woman, and being poor, to prove once and for all that the boundaries imposed by society absolutely do not dictate the boundaries of a person's calling.
I want to end this explainer with a thought directly inspired by our source material. It is a total mic drop question that challenges basically everything about how we view potential and power. Ready? What if the person the world overlooks is the very person God intends to send? Amanda Smith was overlooked by literally every single metric of her society, yet she drove incredible historical change. Kind of makes you wonder who we might be overlooking today, doesn't it? Thank you so much for exploring this remarkable life with us. Keep asking questions and keep looking beyond the surface.